I had a buddy that his name was Sean Mims out of Los Angeles. I had taught him how to do tax return fraud. I had told Sean, I go missing, right? I go missing for 3 months. I told him if I ever went missing, not to contact me. And so I go missing, then I show back up online. First day, he contacts. So he becomes a target. And they identify him pretty quickly at that point. He's set to be arrested sometime in March of 6. That's when he's set to be arrested. Operation Rolling Stone was the name of the operation. 9 people were supposed to be arrested that night. So Secret Service goes and arrests this guy. They search his apartment and don't find anything. The apartment manager comes out and explains to him how Sean has done all kinds of work to the apartment. As a matter of fact, he brought in $30,000 worth of Italian tile to put in the apartment that he's renting. And by the way, last night he had a U-Haul out here and took out a whole shitload of stuff. So Secret Service comes back in. They look at me and they're like, we need you to take a polygraph. And my answer was, I ain't taking a polygraph. So they're like, well, we'll throw you back in jail if you don't. And I was like, call my lawyer. Lawyer gets me on the phone. He's like, you don't have to take the polygraph. I was like, well, good. I'm not going to. He's like, but they will throw you back in jail. I was like, don't want to do that. He's like, have you done anything? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, you can try to pass the polygraph. I'm like, okay. So I was looking at him, I was like, let's take the polygraph. They asked 3 questions. The questions were, have you talked to anybody? Have you been on a computer outside of the offices? Have you talked to the press, which I was interviewing with a New York Times writer the entire time? And then have you contacted or warned anybody about investigations? And I failed polygraph completely. So they revoked the bond. Take me back down to Charleston County, throw me into jail. 3 days later, Secret Service shows back up and pulled me out of a cell. It's Jim Ramacone and Bobby Kirby. And they were, I mean, honestly, they were good men. And they gave me chances upon chances to do the right thing. And I was not ready to do that. And Jim Ramacone and Bobby's in there. And Bobby was a friend. I mean, he truly was. Later on, a couple of years ago, I had a chance to have lunch with the man, and told him I was sorry for everything I did to him because I got him and another agent fired, and told him I was sorry for what happened. And he told me then, he's like, "We were your friends, man. We were truly your friends." So they were good men.
They wanted to help.
Yeah.
They wanted you to be a good man.
Yeah. Yeah. And what got me so damn bad is I told him, I was like, man, I'm trying to be a better guy.
Yeah.
And he's like, Brett, you always were a good guy. You just didn't know it. And
fuck, people like that.
Yeah.
We need people like that in this world.
Yeah.
You need somebody to basically believe that you can be a good man.
So Jim Ramacone pulls me out. He's the second in charge in South Carolina. He's got the Miranda waiver in front of him, right? And he looks at me. He's like, I'm playing hard ass. Bobby's over here looking distraught and, like a hurt dog. And Jim's like, here's the way this is going to work. He said, you're going to tell me everything you've done the past 6 years, or I'm going to make it my mission in life to fuck over you and your family. Yeah. And he said, not just this case. Once you get out of prison, I'll hound you the rest of your life. Then he slides the Miranda waiver over and he's like, now you want to talk? And I looked at him and I was like, nope. He was like, he gets up, gets all red in the face, storms out. As on the way out, he's like, fuck you very much. Yeah. So I go back to the cell. A week later, I was only under state charges. A week later, judge rules they revoke the bond improperly.
Wow.
Oh. Reinstates the bond. Nobody calls the Secret Service to tell them I walk out. I walk out. I was dating this stripper. And I told my mom, I was like, well, if they're going to fuck me, they're going to have to find me.
So you just went on the move.
Yeah. I called this stripper girl up. I'd given her like $60K, some bullshit like that. And I told her, I was like, Kim, I need some money. And she was like, what? And I was like, look, I said, give me $1,000. I'll give you back $3,000 in 2 weeks. She's like, okay. So I met her in Augusta, Georgia, and got the 1,000 from her and started driving west on I-20. No idea where to go to, anything else. Got to Dallas. There was a prepaid debit card supplier in Dallas. Went in, walked in the office, convinced the guy, social engineering, convinced the guy to give me 60 prepaid debit cards without a driver's license, without payment, anything else. He did. And that started the run. I ended up stealing, from that, I stole like $160K profit, used that to buy a Jeep Cherokee, and went on. The idea was to steal enough money to bug out to Florianopolis, Brazil, and set up shop down there and do it again.
That was the dream.
That was it. So I was on the run for 4 months, stole $600,000. I was in Las Vegas, Nevada. One day I had stolen, the night before, I'd stolen $160K out of ATMs. Went in the next morning, I woke up, signed on to cartersmarket.com, which was ran by Max Butler, the Iceman. And there's my name, U.S. Most Wanted, on it. And that gets your attention. That was my real name with the U.S. Most Wanted beside of it. Nobody knew my real name in that environment at all, but then they did. And it was talking about me being part of the Secret Service, Operation Anglerfish, everything else. So of course they're all like,
everybody's after.
They're like, oh yeah, we're going to get this son of a bitch. So I sit there looking at it, and I was like, said it out loud. I was like, well, Mr. Johnson, you've made the United States Most Wanted list. What do you do now? And I was like, I'm going to Disney World. So, literally said that out loud. So loaded up the Jeep, drove from Las Vegas to Orlando, Florida, and got the 2 annual passes, one to Disney World, the other one to Universal Studios. Paid for a timeshare. They were building these new timeshares right off Universal Drive, building these brand new timeshares. Paid for a timeshare 9 months, cash.
Yeah.
I was like, we take cash? Yeah, we take cash. There's $12,900. Then it wasn't furnished, so I went down to a furniture store, bought $30,000 in furniture. They had seized a DVD collection of mine worth $30,000, bought that back, and proceeded to go to Disney World every day. And that lasted about 6 weeks. They used a triggerfish, is what they use. Nowadays, it's called a stingray, to find me. So one day I was, it was like 10:30 in the morning on Saturday. September 16th was the day, 2006. So, yeah, 2006, September 16th. I was used to the builders coming around knocking, making sure everything was all right. So I was asleep, heard this knock at the door, and get up, look through the keyhole, nobody's there, the peephole, nobody's there. I was like, huh. Open the door, step out into the hallway. Walking down the hall is Bobby Kirby, another South Carolina guy, and a Orlando, Orange County cop. And they turn around. They're like, hey, Brett. I'm like, hey, Bobby, how are you? And it's like, we're good. How are you? And I'm like, I'm fine. Would you like to come in? And he was like, let's put you in cuffs first. And I was like, that's probably a good idea. So he was like, he walks in.
I like those guys.
He's like, have you got anything in here? And I was like, yeah, there's $120,000 in the bedroom. And he was like, seriously? I was like, yeah, that and an AK-47. His face goes white, and he's like, you got a rifle? And I was like, no, I'm kidding with you. He was like, okay. So they throw me in jail in Orange County, and they give me diesel therapy. And diesel therapy it took like 2 weeks to transport me from Orange County, Orlando, to Columbia, South Carolina. And what happens is you stop at every county jail you possibly can, go through the processing, which is about 6 hours. Mm-hmm. Once you get to your bunk, hey, time to transport you.
They do that on purpose?
On purpose. Wears you down mentally and physically and everything. I get to Columbia, South Carolina. Now, while I was at Orange County, what happens is this inmate, because we were in federal holding, this inmate, he looks at me, his name was Yeti, and he's like, hey, man, the only time you get off in federal prison is the drug program. I was like, well, man, I don't use drugs. And he's like, you can find a drug problem, can't you? And I was like, I can find a drug problem. So what happens is every county jail I stop at on the way to Columbia, I tell them I'm alcoholic and cocaine. So by the time I get to Columbia, South Carolina, they've got this paper trail of Mr. Johnson requesting help for drugs. I had hired Strom Thurmond's son as an attorney. They make me drop him because I paid for him with illegal funds. So they give me a public defender. He gets a psychological evaluation ordered for me. So psychologist comes into county jail, 4-hour interview. About halfway through, he looks at me. He's like, use any type of drugs? And I was like, yeah. He's like, what do you use? Cocaine. Smoke or snort? Snort. How much? An 8-ball a day. That's a lot. Yeah. Do you have any trouble out of that? Yeah. I can't get an erection. And he looks at me, and I'm looking at him like, because I had gotten that shit from Boogie Nights. Yeah. So I'm like, and finally I'm like, is that right? And he was like, it could happen. I was like, okay. So that makes it into my pre-sentence report. So all federal inmates, probation office and prosecutor, they do this detailed background check to basically tell the judge how much time to give you. All right. So that drug bit with that interview makes it into the PSR. So day of sentencing. I'd pled guilty, day of sentencing. The prosecutor, he stands up, and this dude is screaming at this point. And he's like, Mr. Johnson's manipulated the Secret Service. He's manipulated the prosecutor. Then he points at the judge. And he's manipulating you today, Your Honor. We insist on the upper limits of the guidelines. Well, I had been telling everybody in the jail that if they give me any more than 60 months, I am not staying. So they were like, okay, sure. So the judge looks at me and she's like, I agree. I'm like, and she says, 75 months. So I looked at my lawyer and I was like, can you get the drug program for me? He's like, I don't know, I'll ask. So he stands up. Your Honor, will you order the drug program for Mr. Johnson? The judge says, no, but I'll recommend he gets evaluated. So the Secret Service had told her, hey, he's full of shit. Yeah. So she's like, no, but I'll recommend he gets evaluated. I looked at my lawyer and I was like, what does that mean? He was like, you're probably not going to get it. And I was like, how soon can you get me to the camp? And he was like, well, if you don't appeal, I can get you there pretty quick. My exact words were, fuck the appeal. Get me to the camp. I'll take it from there. Mm-hmm. He looks at me like I'm the biggest idiot in the world. I get sent to, because you can get a camp recommended. I have friends, family members, look for camps that don't have a fence around them. And we settle on Ashland, Kentucky. 6 weeks later, I'm at Ashland, Kentucky, and pull up there, 14-foot fence, razor wire on top. And I'm like, I don't climb fences. So I go in. First question I ask is, are there any jobs outside of the fence? And he was like, guard's like, well, you can work in the national forest. And I'm like, no, I'll die out there. And he was like, well, you could do landscaping. And I'm like, I can run a weed eater. So 2 days later, I walk into the landscaping office, and the cop, this is this genius of some of these people and institutions, the cop behind his desk, the entire wall is a blown up photo of the compound and the outlying area. So I can literally sit there and plot where I'm going. All right. Really? My dad, I hadn't spoken to that man in years. And he shows up at my sentencing and stands up in front of the judge. And he's like, Your Honor, I want to make sure Brett gets a good start. He can live with me when he gets out, everything else. Looking back, the man meant that. And I just thought it was bullshit at the time. So he starts to visit me in prison. I mean, yeah, in prison, he starts to visit. And about the third visit in, he looks at me. He's like, I've been reading about you online. I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah. He's like, that's a lot of money you made. And I was like, yeah. He's like, you think you can teach somebody how to do that? And I'm like, so what I used to say, and it's this thing of, really coming to terms with things. What I used to say is I thought my dad was back in my life and that he was just trying to use me. All right. The truth of the matter is that my dad hadn't really seen me except in that frame of crime, being that criminal with my mom, everything else. And I really think that's how the man was trying to communicate with me.
He wanted to connect with you in the places where you know, where you love, where you're interested in, right, where your addiction is, essentially.
Right. And what I did is I manipulated the man into helping me escape. So I agreed to teach him how to do tax fraud. And in return, he had the only money he had to his name. He had $4,000 cash. So I manipulated him into giving me that and to dropping me off a change of clothes, a cell phone, and a driver's license. The only driver's license he had was my driver's license, Brett Johnson. So I was at the camp for, 6-8 weeks. And the hardest worker that landscaping had ever seen. At one point, the cops got me on a mountainside with a broom sweeping off the mountain. I'm like, yeah, we'll do that. Absolutely.
So you're building trust with the guys there.
Yeah, working my ass off.
Yeah.
And at the end of 6 weeks, I take off. And I lasted, I think, 2-3 weeks, something like that. U.S. Marshals, I made it 100.
Take off, you escaped.
Escaped. U.S. Marshals, they're canvassing a 3-state area. They find me, I think, 250 miles away. It's like Lexington, Kentucky. They find me in Lexington because I had to use my real driver's license. I had a laptop. I had prepaid debit cards. And I had stolen identity information. And kind of the way it got me was I had dyed my hair this flaming red. I had this deep tan. I didn't look anything like myself. And I was at a hotel, had the curtains open, saw this guy. I was on the laptop, saw this guy walk by. He walks by the window and he stops. And then he backs up. He looks inside. He knocks on the window. I look up at him. He's like, you. I was like, me? And he's like, you. Then he pulls out this badge and he points at it. He's like, and then he points at the door. Now. So I was like, oh, okay. Oh, wow. So I open up the door. And he's like, U.S. Marshals Service. So they arrest me. And
how did they track you down?
They canvassed that area. They talked to every hotel, everything else.
It's like traditional, like they were
traditional police work is what it was.
So it wasn't like from the internet. They kind of got something.
Not at all, just straight
good police.
U.S. Marshals are outstanding. Yeah, everything they do. So they arrest me. I go to I'm initially held at a county jail in Moorhead, Kentucky, and that was one hell of an experience there. But then I'm transferred after sentencing on that. So sentencing. Here's the weird thing. So I spent I think 2 or 3 months at the county jail in Moorhead, Kentucky. Get sentenced. At my sentencing, it happened so quickly after the initial sentencing that they used the exact same pre-sentence report. The report that's got all that drug shit in there. So at my sentencing, prosecutor's there, Secret Service is there, judge, me, and my attorney. Prosecutor stands up. He's like, Your Honor, we would like it if you would consider that when Mr. Johnson was arrested, he had a laptop, he had all this information with him, looks like he was engaged in identity theft yet again. Judge looks at the prosecutor, says no. Says, hey, if you were going to charge him with it, you should have charged him with it. I'm only considering the escape. Then he looks at me, and he's like, Mr. Johnson, he said, it looks like by you keeping your mouth shut right now, you're really saving yourself a pretty serious charge. And my response was, yes, Your Honor. And he was like, then he opens up the pre-sentence report and he's fingering through it. And he's like, it also looks like before you got involved with all these drugs, you were a pretty good citizen. I was like, yes, Your Honor. And he's like, so here's what I'm going to do. He said, I'm going to give you 18 months on the escape. I was like, okay. He said, I'm also going to give you, no, it's 15 months on the escape. He said, I'm going to give you 15 months on the escape. He said, and I'm also going to order the drug program for you. I was like, yes, Your Honor. So the drug program gives you a year off and it gives you 6 months in halfway house. So by escaping, I got out of prison 3 months earlier than what I should have gotten out of.
So the original thing about drugs worked in the long
long term. The interesting thing with that, and this was the best lie I ever told. Honestly, the best lie I ever told. I spent 8 months in solitary confinement. Okay, 8 months, and that's an experience because you ain't got no books for the first month or so. Then they give you a King James Bible. Yeah, and then.
So for a month, no books.
No books for a month.
What? This is a pretty small
6x9 room.
6x9.
Yeah.
No books.
No books. No paper. No pen. No pencil.
Just you're alone with your mind.
You got a mat, a toilet.
What's that like?
You sleep as much as you can. You're sleeping 16, 18 hours a day is what you're doing.
What about? Were you thinking about? even just going back to like Elizabeth, you think about
you go through all that,
the whole
through all that, every bit.
Your mom too.
Yeah, going through every single bit of that, and so you're supposed to get out an hour a day. Law says you're supposed to get out an hour a day. That's the law. That's not the way things actually happen. What actually happens is you're lucky to get out an hour a week. You take a shower twice a week, and that's it. You get a phone call once a month.
Oh, so you don't get to see nature.
Don't see anything. You get in solitary. All right. And it takes about a week. The first week is the roughest. You're bouncing off the walls that first week because you can't sleep, can't do anything else. Then you start to adapt to it after a while. When that book does arrive, you're happy as hell to have it. I'm well versed in the King James Bible. So you're happy to have it. Then finally, you get other books that come in from that point. Spent 8 months at that. And they send me out to a real prison. Big Spring, Texas, West Texas, where have you been out there?
No,
man,
but I could tell.
Prairie dogs and tarantulas.
Yeah,
is what it is. It got no kidding. It gets so hot that warnings come on the radio telling you not to drive on certain streets because they're melted. That's Big Spring.
Oh.
So if you've seen the movie From Dusk Till Dawn, the opening scene is in Big Spring, Texas.
So it's hot.
Yeah, very hot. So, and that's where I find out what a real prison is. And it's not ran by guards. Prisons are ran by inmates. And that's a fact. So you're met at the door by whatever race you are, is what happens. So Big Spring is a converted Air Force compound. It's a disciplinary prison. So you get the bad guys that are in there. So I go through processing. And I'm walking up to the unit, and I'm met at the door by a guy named Nick Sandifer. He's the treasurer of the Aryan Brotherhood. And first question out of his mouth is, any more white guys come in? And shit, I didn't know. I was like, hell, I don't know, 4 or 5? Next question is, what are you in here for? My answer was, because I'm like, I ain't got no worries. My answer was, computer crime. Smiled at him. And it turns out, wrong thing to say. Because computer crime is not credit card theft or hacking or any bullshit like that. Computer crime in prison is child pornography. So tell him that. He looks at me like I'm a piece of shit, goes and gets his buddies. They circle around. What are you in here for?
I like how the Aryan Brotherhood has like lines. They're like,
oh yeah, this
child porn. That's it. That's the bad guy.
They circle around. They're like, what did you say you're in here for? So I'm sitting there trying to explain it to them. They're like, you tell a good story. You still said this. Now,
computer crime basically really does mean usually child pornography.
In prison, yeah. And what you see, and that's one of the things you find out, the guys that are going in there for child porn, they will tell them it's credit card theft.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. They've learned.
So I'm that guy.
But you also don't, I mean, for people who are just listening to this, you don't exactly look like the typical computer hacker.
That's true. That's very true. But I don't look like the pedophile either.
That's right. So. That's right. But it's like, it doesn't make it seem like I guess you're not wearing a hoodie and you're not like right. Emo, dark,
So, the way it actually works in prison, they won't attack you until they know. All right. So they have to see paperwork, which now in federal prison, you don't get transported with paperwork because of that. So they have to see paperwork, or a guard will tell them what you're in there for. Guards will tell who the pedophiles are. So none of the guards told them that I was anything. Mm-hmm. So for the first month, they think I am, but they're not doing anything because they don't know for sure. At the end of the first month, I'd been talking to Kevin Polson over at Wired Magazine about Max Butler. He does an article about that. Shows up in Wired Magazine. So at the end of the first month, Wired Magazine hits the compound, front cover, all the story. You would think it saved me. So I'm reading the article, really happy about it. So what happens is 4 o'clock is mail call. 4 o'clock is a stand-up count nationwide. After 4 o'clock is your mail call. They hand out all the mail for the day. So the mail comes, I get the magazine. I'm like reading through it. I'm like, well, shit, I'm good to go. Then it says Brett Johnson, Secret Service informant in the article.
So you're now a snitch.
Which is right up there with the pedophiles. So we go to dinner after that, at dinner, you can hear it. You can hear the chatter.
Yeah.
We got a snitch. I think it's that guy over there.
Yeah.
Warden, next day, shuts down the entire compound. Calls me into his office. They got security there. You got the counselors there and everything else. Warden looks at me. He's like, did you give an interview to Wired Magazine? I'm like, yeah. He's like, do you not know they will kill you in here? I was like, he was like, do you feel safe? Well, I know if you tell me you don't feel safe, they transport you. Transport you means another 8 months in solitary confinement. You start to see shit in solitary after a while.
Yeah.
So I'm like, no, not going to do that. So I'm like, completely safe. He was like, look, he's like, if anybody says anything to you, immediately come to us because they'll fucking kill you. So they do a locker search, try to confiscate the magazines. They can't. The next day, I walk into the unit. There's Nick Sandifer laying on his bunk, magazine wide open, reading it. I'm like, oh shit. Walked up to him. I was like, hey, Nick, what are you doing? He's like, oh, doing some reading. I was like, anything interesting? He's like, it's getting there. I was like, let me save you the trouble. Take the magazine, turn it over to the page. I was like, right there is what you're looking for. He was like, man, I already knew. I was like, do we have a problem? And he looks at me. He's like, is anyone on the compound you told on? I was like, no. He's like, until someone gets here you snitched on, we're okay. I was like, okay. He's like, but I need you to do something for me. All right. So in federal prison, you got to have a job. Everybody works. Doesn't matter what you do, but you got to work. I got a job in education teaching a lit class. Every Wednesday, 6 to 8:30 p.m., lit. And every area on the compound signs up for the lit class. Had a couple guards every now and then popped in. And did we teach lit? No. We taught fraud every Wednesday, 6 to 8:30 p.m. That's how I didn't get my ass beaten. Yeah. And my other job, I had 2 jobs with them. The other job, you get to the point, it's weird, man. You get to the point, people walking off the bus. You know immediately 2 groups of people. You know who the bank robbers are immediately. Just by them walking off the bus. You're like, that motherfucker's a bank robber. And you know who the pedophiles are immediately. So my job as the white guy was to approach the white pedophiles and have a conversation. And the conversation was basically, hey, don't know what you're in here for. Don't care what you're in here for. But if you got some sort of fucked up charge, you need to tell me. Mm-hmm. If you tell me, everything's going to be all right. If you don't tell me, you see those guys over there? If you start to associate with them or they start to talk to you and then they find out you're in here on something, they're going to kill you.
And what are the things? Pedophile,
rapist, anything that harms children, harms women, anything like that.
So there are, it's like the mob. There's rules. There's an ethical code. Even if you have the division between races on all that, you still have these lines drawn.
And what that
there's
looks
a hierarchy too.
Very, very much so. And what that looks like in prison, depending on it depends on the security class that you're in, what level prison. But at that prison, what that looked like was you're not allowed to talk to anybody. You're not allowed to watch television. You can go to the library. You don't associate with anyone except your own type. If you do anything like this, we will kill you. If someone wants to extort you, we will do that too, and you won't tell on us, or we'll kill you. So that's the way that works at that point.
And everybody quickly learns this.
Quickly. And so typically the guys would say, I just want to do my own time. That would be the line. And it's like, okay, don't mess with him. All right. Every now and then you'd have somebody lie, and that would come with those types of consequences. I got to see, while I was there, saw 2 people murdered, went through 3 prison riots, and through my entire tenure in prison, saw 4 suicides. The people who got killed, it was, so we had outside, you had this track, a 1/3 of a mile track. You walk it counterclockwise, and inside of the track, you got 2 handball courts. So of an evening, it happened both times. All of us would be walking, doing our exercises. And at the top of the key, like a flock of birds, you'd see all the inmates start to migrate down toward the gate. So first time you see that migration, you look up in the distance, and the one inmate's got another inmate down, and he's just hammering his head right into the pavement like that right there. Well, guards don't stop that because a guard may get hurt. So a guard is 15 minutes coming out to stop that until everything's over. By that point, the guy doesn't have a head. They shut the compound down, and this is what happens. So you shut the entire compound down. They make 2 lines of the inmates, and what happens is the inmate walks into a room. They shut the door behind the inmate. Guard asks him 2 questions. First question is, did you see anything? The answer is no. Second question is, if you had seen anything, would you say anything? Answer is no. Guard then says, get the fuck out. And that's it. Anybody that stays in any longer than that is automatically suspect. So there was one incident, I remember this Hispanic guy, he's in there for a few minutes. And everybody's like, what's going on? So his people then call him over. Explain to us what went on.
Yeah.
And it happens like that.
It's fascinating that because you talked about the network of trust in the cybercrime community. And here's a network of trust.
Absolutely.
In the prison crime community.
Absolutely. And
trust.
Trust matters. Trust drives everything at the end of the day. The riots that I went through, the first riot, man, you're scared to death. Scared to death. You know, you got the cops dressed up in the Ninja Turtle outfits. You got the rubber bullets, the tear gas canisters, all that crap. You got the inmates that are raising hell. Scared to death. The second riot, you calm down. Second riot, you start to notice. This is a racial riot. This is typically, and almost always, it's Hispanics and African Americans. So
you get to detect what is the motivation for the riot, what is the reason, right. And that gives you some calm.
That's exactly right. So the second riot, you start to notice this. Hey, man, this ain't me. This ain't our group.
Yeah.
Third riot, no shit. Third riot, you lay in your bunk. And you let them wage war all around you. And every now and then you have an inmate that'll run up to you and he'll point to a locker and say, is that your locker? And if you tell them yes, they leave it alone. If you say it's not my locker, they'll break into it and steal everything out of it and go from there. And that's what happens. But
so you did your time for 5 years.
5.5.
5.5. You made it out.
I went through I told you it was a good lie that I told. I went through the residential drug abuse program. It's a 9-month intensive therapy. And the way I got to that, this counselor at Big Spring, he bought this. He wanted inmates to be educated. He was a really good guy. So he wanted inmates to be educated. He got a discount on a game theory class set. So he gets all these discs and everything, and he's asking, does anybody on the compound know anything about game theory? And somebody says, if anybody does, it'll be Brett Johnson. So he comes up to me one day at my buggy. He's like, are you Brett Johnson? I was like, yeah. He's like, do you know anything about game theory? And I was like, yes, I do. So I start rattling off Prisoner's Dilemma and everything else. He's like, will you teach a class? So I start teaching that. I start teaching inmates public speaking. And to make friends with this counselor. So it gets time where I'm supposed to be transferring out to this drug program that they only had in Fort Worth. And the transfers are taking like 4 or 5 months. And that's 4 or 5 months I could be out free. So I went up to him one day and I was like, look, his name was Keeley. I was like, look, man, I said, is there any way that I can get transferred out any sooner? And he looks at me, he's like, Brett, I cannot help you. And I was like, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for even trying. So he said that. A week later, I'm on a bus going to Fort Worth. So he got me to Fort Worth.
I got it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So it was a 9-month program, 24 hours a day of cognitive behavioral therapy. It had nothing to do with drugs. It was all peer study stuff and CBT training. And honestly, it's the best thing that could ever happen.